I go in there, guns a-blazing, I hate that term, ready to, fight or prove my worth, I got walls, right? And when I was just clear of what I was worth, there was no question in my mind about what I was worth and what I had to offer. And what I had to offer was not um, common in the marketplace, right? I was a pioneer in this field. And um, I had so many cases, case studies of places that I had helped, small businesses, business owners, all these places, all these people that I had helped, that when I went into these places, I knew what I was capable of.
Welcome to Women and Work, the show where we take an inside look at how women are overcoming our own unique challenges as we grow our careers or build a business while nurturing relationships and family. I'm Diane Mocha, founder and CEO of MomSub, the childcare app that connects you to a substitute mom. And I want you to know that work can fit your life. Our guests show you the way they've done it. Today, I'm with Lisa Giruzzi, a coach and founder of Transformational Conversations. Lisa helps busy professionals improve their performance and their lives while avoiding burnout. Lisa, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
I see you got a degree in psychology, and early in your career, you worked in domestic violence prevention, overseeing child welfare projects in New York State. And then 22 years ago, you started writing, speaking, and coaching full time before it was trendy, right? Now, I
Way
know that
before.
helping, yes. Now everyone seems to be a coach, right? But you went through this experience helping others dealing with abusive situations. And then you were launching and growing a business. And both of those things can be very fraught with bias and difficulties for women. And so I want to start out by asking you what you think has been the biggest challenge for you during your whole career because specifically you are a woman.
Well, where do I start? I guess the biggest challenge was, and sometimes still is, overcoming the boxes that people put you in innocently. I honestly think that for the most part, people don't know that they're doing it. It's sort of unconscious, a reaction to a female in either a position of authority where it's not something they're used to. And again, I was doing work with child abuse and neglect and domestic violence back in the 90s, early 90s. And back then, the understanding, it seems like it was not that long ago when you say the 90s, it's a long time ago. And,
Before the internet, basically.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And well, I remember the day we got desktops. It was like, what is this new world we're in? You know? Um, but anyway, I spent a lot of time working with police and attorneys and judges back then.
Men, lots of men.
And yeah, 90%. And we would work cases together, especially the serious physical and sexual abuse cases. And there was a certain level of especially with the police, deferring to us because we were dealing with children. But then there'd be this flip of we were sort of done, our usefulness was done, and then they'd want to run and take the case and not want to include us all along the way. And there were far more women in the work in my office, and I don't know how it is now, but back then it was primarily dominated by women doing that kind of family intervention. And so anyway, it was really a struggle to be taken seriously. I did a lot of testifying, a lot of work with um, police and, like I said, attorneys, and back then it was very challenging. And then, I started my transformational career, sort of fell into a educational transformational education program. I didn't even know what it was, but what I knew is what I was doing wasn't making the difference I wanted to make. I kept feeling like I was trying to help these families who desperately needed help, but it was almost like I was getting in my own way, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how. And Long story short, was introduced to this idea of transformation and as a possibility for change. And I was like, I'm in, because it helped me so much. And I started just naturally using it with my clients at the time. And I was noticing this difference. And so that's what caused me to become a coach. I continued to work in the field of human services for a number of years. Um, but I was training through this educational company and other courses that I took and, have trained ongoingly, so that when I launched full time in 2003, um, I had a lot of coaching and um, training under my belt and speaking as well. But what was interesting was I was now going into companies and very male dominated, C-suite executives, and having to have conversations about how I could help. And it was an interesting time to, a fairly new field, coaching, like softball, baseball, like what are you coaching, And to learn to create what I would say create a listening. In other words, create my relationship with people rather than resist whatever thinking they had about me as a woman, me as a young woman, now me as a, older woman. I don't like to think of myself that way, but tis true. So anyway, that's a lot of words to answer your question, but it really, I think, overcoming other people's perceptions about what being a woman in a particular position means is always going to be a challenge.
Hmm. And when you talk about people taking you seriously, and this is a theme that comes up over and over for other women that I interview in this program, and I wonder, after you got all this coaching, if that bias, say, was still there when you moved into this other arena where you were dealing again with men. You could have just coached individuals or women, but you went into C-suite, where that's going to help sustain the business, right? There's money there, but then you're
Hmm.
dealing again with these men. I wonder if the transformation was something on your part to sort of accept and adjust and um and make your own change, rather than trying to change them and make them take you seriously. How did that transformation make you different when you were interacting with these men who may have had these same kind of biases, and then have the result be different than what you were dealing with previously?
Yeah, that's really well said, because it was about me in a certain way, right? Because, well, I think in every way, but at that time, I didn't know all of what I know now. But I think that the thing that helped me was how much transformation I had had, right? So there were so many places that I could see that my opinions, my interpretations, and assessments were made at a very young age. And I didn't even know that they were still driving my decision making until I went into this transformational program and became a transformational coach and started to see these invisible paradigms that were at work all the time, kind of driving the bus, and there were times when an elementary school kid was driving the bus. It was my adult life, right? And and it was more than just these conscious opinions we have. I like this, I don't like that. It was really the ones that were invisible. And when I saw all that in me, and I could see the innocence of that it wasn't something I actively chose, it wasn't something that I said, oh, I'm going to be, mean spirited, or I'm going to like this kind of thing and not that kind of thing. It doesn't happen that consciously. It's conditioning that happens innocently, right? Whether it's, all the different ways we're influenced, right? And when I could see the innocence in me, then I could see the innocence in them. And so it helped me to not be resistant to how they were being with me. Like I could just see that it was, it what, and again, some people said I was naive, and I was like, listen, it's working. So you can call it naive if you want, but what I could tell you is when I go in there, guns a blazing, I hate that term, ready to fight or prove my worth. I got walls, right? And when I was just clear of what I was worth, there was no question in my mind about what I was worth and what I had to offer. And what I had to offer was not um, common in the marketplace, right? I was a pioneer in this field. And um, I had so many cases, case studies of places that I had helped, small businesses, business owners, all these places, all these people that I had helped, that when I went into these places, I knew what I was capable of. And, it, in some ways, it was very similar to going into these homes, working with families and not having children, right? And how sometimes parents are like, wait till you have kids, and then tell me. And I was never in there telling them how to parent. I shouldn't say never. After I um learned about coaching, I would listen a lot, and I would offer ideas and ask questions in a very gentle, um caring way with all kinds of compassion. And people would be interested. They would like lean into what I was saying. And so I use that same sort of approach working with folks, men in these executive positions, with that understanding. Like when I realized that parents were doing the best they knew how to do, and sometimes these situations were awful, but they were doing the best they knew how to do. It changed how I approach them. That was a paradigm shift, right? Versus they shouldn't be this way, and this is wrong. Like nobody likes to be told they're wrong, right? And so with executives, and to this day with my coaching clients, where I listen from and how I approach the situation is, how does this make sense to this person? What is happening that their ways of acting and ways of being, they make sense to them. So I'm listening to whatever they're telling me and trying to help them connect the dots. Because once you see that, that how you have the dots connected don't really make sense, and you can kind of see that, then none of it feels threatening, right? It just is like, oh, I believe that thing. That's not true. Right? Or it used to be true, it's not true anymore, right? And so that kind of questioning. So again, I know I'm answering in a very long-winded way, but I find that the more I can see the innocence and how other people are being, the easier it is for them to hear what I have to say, because they're not feeling made wrong. They're not feeling like I'm criticizing or judging them.
Hmm. It sounds like when you were with these abuse survivors, you had all this empathy because, of course, you knew what they had been through. But then when you would, you know, an hour later or a day later, then have to deal with the police and feel like they weren't taking you seriously, you got into a defensive posture. So you no longer had empathy for their situation because you were thinking of your own. And so when you went in with these executives, rather than coming in going, I need to prove to them that I'm capable, in they because they look at me like I'm a woman and maybe I don't know what it's like to be in the C-suite, but instead you were leading, it sounds like, with empathy instead of that defensiveness, no longer trying to prove yourself, just trying to get in their head and show them who they were. And I wonder if what's going on in the world today, we talked about this a little before the show started, with the feeling of chaos that a lot of people have, that people are feeling more defensive. And how can people even learn from the experience that you've been through to be able to not be defensive when they feel attacked, when they feel scared they're going to be ripped away from their family and sent away?
Yeah.
How can you not be defensive about that? How can you be empathetic to your abductor?
Yeah, that's a big topic. And, I don't know that I exactly know how to answer that. What I can say is that there's so much going on that's hard to understand. And when we, let's say in our relationships with people, maybe family members or friends who think differently than we do, or even trying to understand um, someone from a different um, position than you're in, it is easy to feel attacked. But ideas can't attack you, right? Ideas don't exist in reality. How they get taken action on exists in reality. So I talk about this a lot with my clients is we mistake fear and danger. They're two different things. Fear is an anticipatory thing. It's something that is thought created. It is a survival strategy that the brain does. None of us have control over that, right? Because that is a survival strategy that evolved. That's why humans are still here, right? It's because if I was out in the woods and I'm like, oh, look at the pretty trees and the wind blowing, and you're like, tiger, and you run, you're going to be in the gene pool. I'm not, right? And so that propensity towards fight or flight um, is a good one. But unfortunately, because people don't understand it, a lot of times we're revering our fears rather than questioning them. So not every fear is created equal, right? So um the brain can be so sensitive. A differing opinion can look like a threat. Why? Because we evolved in tribes. People not connecting, you can get thrown out of a tribe, right? People who are thrown out of the tribe don't survive, and that's ingrained in us. That's evolution. That's in our biology, but we're not living that way anymore. So our brain hasn't evolved quick enough to the way we're living. So my work with people is to help them explore the fear, not from a psychological perspective, but more from a, is it true? Right? This fear that you have about the future, about what's going to sit with your boss, and you think this is going to happen. Do you know? No, right? Fear is almost always a projection onto the future. It's never the past, and rarely what's happening now. Rarely, right? Danger is always present. It's a not always present. It is a present moment thing. That you don't even have to be afraid because your body will take care of it, right? If there's suddenly a loud noise wherever you're sitting, there's going to be a response and you're not going to be in charge of that, right? We jump, we look, we get, I've seen, you crouch underneath, you don't even know what happened. That's not us thinking. That is the human system taking care of itself. So when you can distinguish between fear and danger, it's very, very helpful
Wow.
because danger takes care, your system will take care of you in danger, right? If there's something that's dangerous, sometimes you do have to think. I'm not saying, throw all the thoughts away, but you don't need a lot of thinking, right? I've been in many crisis situations, and you can ask me why I did X, Y, and Z, and I'll be like, yeah, I don't know. Made sense at the time, right? Because it just happens. When you're afraid, then you start to overthink. You start to plan, strategize. What about this? What about that? What about this?
Ruminate.
What about ruminate? And that stuff hasn't happened. You're trying to avoid a future that you created. That's really powerful. Like if you let that sit in, I'm worried about the future. So I created that. That hasn't happened. There's no future in reality. It's always blank. So whatever I think the future is going to be is my projecting my best guess from my past. So I've created that future. And now I'm strategizing to protect from the future I made up.
And it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy if you don't be
Almost
careful.
always is. It almost always is.
Yeah.
Because even if it goes well, we attribute falsely why, right? Because, oh my God, it went well, but it's because, and then we make up a reason, like as if we know. I always tell my clients, if you know how to predict the future, I would like the lottery numbers, s'il vous plaît, right? Because We don't. Nobody can predict the future. It's not possible.
Hmm.
Now, does that mean that if, for example, when I worked with women who are being abused, does that mean that if many things have happened and you can, yes, I'm not saying we don't have some predictive properties, but even then you don't know. So can I used to work with safety planning and all that kind of thing. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm talking about the day-to-day stuff that we innocently make up about what's going to happen when we get to work, what's going to happen when we get home, the traffic, the this, the kids, the this, the this. 90% of it doesn't happen, if not more. But how much energy, how much life energy have we given to something, planning for something that doesn't even exist in reality?
A worry, yeah. I wonder what drew you to that field that you were in initially with dealing with child abuse and domestic violence. Was there anything in your past that caused you to want to explore that as a career?
Well, when I was a kid, I'm the youngest of six. My dad died when I was 9. It was a very difficult time. My mom was of the age where she didn't even know how to write a check. And so, making ends meet, trying, she worked in the school system in the kitchen, wasn't a lot of money, but we used to get a lot of good food. I'd have free lunch at school, and then I'd come home and have dinner from free lunch, what was ever left over at my mom's school. But, that kind of chaos, some of the issues that arose, just having a big family. When I was in like 11th, I think it was 11th grade, I was struggling a great deal. And luckily, one of the principals noticed that I went from straight A's to barely passing and brought me in. And I shared with him what was going on in the family, and he hooked me up with a social worker. And I didn't even really know what that was then. And I would take the bus and see him after school and then take the late bus and get home. So my mom never even really knew about it. And I don't know if they could do that today, but he helped me so much, the social worker, that I got interested in, like, you can make a living? Like, this is a job? And I'll never forget my brother when I was deciding on what to go to school for, and I decided originally I was going to go for social work. I ended up changing to psychology, but he was begging me not to do that because he's like, "You're never going to have any money." He was into computers; they were just really taking off, and he was incredibly smart, brilliant man, still is, and. The computers used to take up the entire room. And, he's like, get into computers. And I was like, no, no, that's not happening. And he was right though, because social work doesn't pay as well as computers. But nonetheless, I've never regretted it. So I went into social work as a way to help. And I started in the field of alcoholism and drug addiction and worked with adolescents in a group home, and then worked with child abuse and neglect, and later domestic violence. And then during that later years, got introduced to transformational education. And I've been doing. I went to business coaching mostly in the beginning because two reasons. One, life coaching wasn't a thing. I
Mhm.
mean, it was just being born, right?
True. Yeah.
I did my first coaches training in 1994, a long time ago, and nobody was doing coaches training, right? It was a 6-month program, and it was wonderful. And I've been in many, many since. So people weren't like investing money or, any amount of money in coaching. So, but businesses were interested in training and developing their employees. And I knew of a business coaching firm in New York that I knew both of the principals. And so it was in New York City. So there was precedent for it. And so I started getting interested in businesses and the dynamics in business. And what I realized is that most people spend more time at work than at home. And so if they could get the kind of training I could give, it would not only increase their performance, which is really my passion, is helping people perform optimally, they would take that home. And if they had less stress at work, they'd take that home, right? If they were better at relating in difficult situations, they'd be better at relating in their family relationships. And that's what I heard. I inevitably, when I would do surveys at the end of programs, people would say, it's help at work great, but man, do I have better relationship with my kids. My teens used to drive me crazy. Now I love that, like things like that. And so it really was for me, the fulfillment of what I really wanted to do was make a difference in the world. And it seemed like there was a greater listening for it, an opening for it, you could say, in business. And that's been true. And so, when I wrote my second book, I did a lot of speaking engagements and um, always have done coaching. But then from there, um, really have focused more on coaching over the last probably 10 years. Just because as my mom aged, I really couldn't be on the road as much and things. So um, now primarily that's what I do. I coach individuals and groups and provide trainings.
Mhm. So when you started realizing this impact you were having on these clients you were working with through your domestic violence prevention job, and then you started recognizing that you could do this elsewhere, and you saw companies that were doing it, what made you decide to start your own company as opposed to going and working for one of these companies who already had a model where you could have been doing this kind of work, had that safe job? What was it about your life situation or your inclination that made you decide to kind of take that leap? And it's difficult to just launch a business, even if you already have those connections and those skills.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the time, w- what sort of well, there are a lot of factors. One was my parents were aging. My mom and my stepfather were aging.
So you had family obligations.
Yeah, in my area. But
You
but
have
that wasn't.
siblings. So I wonder, as a woman, why did it fall to you?
Well, it wasn't just me. It
Okay.
really wasn't. But my husband also, his family lives about 90 minutes from us. And you know, all when I met my husband, I met him in one of the transformational education programs that it was a seminar. And I met him in 1994, right after I did the coaches training, and he was new to it. And so our relationship has always been, the context has been transformation. We have an extraordinary, and I'm not just saying that, we have an extraordinary relationship. And so I lived in Manhattan for about 3 years, working for the company that I initially trained with. I got a full-time paying position with them. So I had been living in New York. My stepdad had a heart attack and pneumonia and survived. And I just didn't like to being that far away. It was like 2.5, 3 hours, but I was working a lot. And so my husband, we weren't married yet at the time. My husband and I were decided, like, he was a lawyer at the time, and he's like, if we move to Manhattan and I get a job with some big law firm and you keep working for this company, we're never going to see each other. It's a different quality of life. And it really wasn't what I wanted. I did not want to live that way. I wanted to have a lot of balance for us. Like, I loved what I did. I had a part-time coaching company. I worked for the at the time for New York State government, and I loved my life. But then a whole bunch of things changed where I worked, and I was in a position where I was sort of at a crossroads, and I had a pretty robust part-time coaching practice living here, and my husband had a really good job. And so we sat down one day and said, where do we want to go from here? And I was very fortunate that my husband was willing to support me in launching the business. And I couldn't have done it. I don't think, well, I don't know if I could have done it. Who knows? Um, I had that cushion
It would have been
of
a bigger
his.
struggle.
It would have been, I'm not sure I would have done it, honestly, because, you know, I think I probably would have waited, but the
You
timing
had a
was
safety
right.
net. You can
Yeah.
grab the trapeze and go if you know that if you fall, there's the safety net. You're not going to crash to the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew I could always go back to work somewhere,
Hmm.
with my skills. And, especially the more I worked in businesses and stuff, I would see jobs being posted and I'd be like, I could do that. I could do that. Right. And so I never, and I never thought that not being successful, not like having my business, whatever being successful means, if it wasn't profitable or whatever, I suppose. Um, was like, well, I close it. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm a failure. I didn't have that because I was selling something nobody knew what the hell it was. So it was kind of I don't know, I just didn't have it about that. And so it was an adventure, and I did a lot of things to help myself succeed. I knew, again, because of the transformational work I had done, I knew sort of the systems that I needed to, as a person who was very outgoing, sitting home alone in my office working. Yeah, that wasn't going to work for me, right? So I joined some women's groups, some network business owner groups, networking groups. I, had days where all I did was go out and meet people, different business people for coffee, and I would interview them. Like, so there were things I was doing that were setting myself up to succeed. Um, and yeah, and I don't know. I now have two businesses, actually. I have this business we're talking about, and then about 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a gentleman who was the president of an EMS, Emergency Medical Services, volunteer organization, ambulance, right? And he'd laugh if I called him a gentleman. He was a young kid at the time, but he was a paramedic and he was so eager to have things work better. And I knew everything I was working in, the businesses I was working in, I knew was going to help him. So I worked with him and his organization, and we rocked it. Like, we doubled the funding, we doubled the number of volunteers, people were getting along better, like all these amazing results in about less than a year. So all of a sudden, all these other ambulance companies are calling him, going, "What are you doing over there? What's in the water? What are you doing?" And so he would give them my card. But again, mostly men. I had no, even though I have an EMT, I'm trained as an EMT. I've never ridden an ambulance. It was required in a job that I had in college. I had to have medical training. And so even, being a child abuse investigator didn't give me enough street cred for these EMTs and paramedics. So I invited Robbie, his name is, to do some of the trainings with me to see how it went. And it was remarkable. I had a male counterpart who was a paramedic, and he would, like, I would say the thing, whatever the principle was, and then he would say why it helped him. And that was it. That was the he was endorsing it or something. And I didn't care because all I wanted was for it to get in, because they were suffering. And so we launched something called the EMS Leadership Academy. And we've had it officially for like 12 years. And what's interesting is the state of New York asked us to write a leadership curriculum for the state of New York. So we did that a couple years ago, and they just started rolling it out. So it was a real honor to be asked to do that from this really rural little ambulance company, and teaching them the exact same principles of communication and leadership, and understanding how your mind works, and giving people the benefit of the doubt, or whatever we called it at the time, and watching that little organization blossom to now, we have a worldwide conference we deliver every year online,
Oh, wow.
where we have sometimes 4 to 5 thousand people participate. So it's pretty exciting. But talk about a male dominated.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Not at the provider level. the providers is probably 50-50 women and men.
Hmm.
Um, but going up in rank, it's mostly men.
Oh, the supervisors. So
Yeah, and the chiefs and et cetera.
you've got both of these businesses. You spent years, like you said, on the road. Running a business is very all consuming. There's oftentimes no boundaries. It's every day of the week. Your work is always following you. I wonder if any of that had an influence on the fact that you told me earlier you don't have any children. So, was it a conscious decision? Was it something that you considered in your life? And how did your career have an impact on that?
Well, it didn't have any impact on that. I couldn't have children. I
Mhm.
also didn't want to have children, so it was convenient for me. Not that I have anything against children. I worked with children a lot,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I was married once before, and thought about it, almost did it, and then decided not to, thankfully, because that didn't turn out well, that relationship. And then years went by before I met my husband, my current husband. And I remember telling him early on when we were dating that if he wanted children, we would have to adopt, and he would have to stay home because I would not be. Uh, I was not interested in that. And he was funny. He's like, "Yeah, I think I'm way too selfish to have children." And we just were like, we both knew it wasn't for us. Now, the other thing I will tell you, and people are often surprised when I say this, from day one, I set boundaries, and I rarely cross them around work. I close my business every day at 6 o'clock, Monday through Friday. Is the latest. Friday's usually earlier. If I work a night, I take another time off. I rarely work weekends. If I do, it's for the EMS Leadership Academy. I am very disciplined about that and always have been. And I have to credit that with someone I met early on who was a male financial planner, but he worked from home. And I asked him how he did it. And he told me he had these systems in place for opening and closing his office. He always got dressed for work, even if he didn't have outside appointments. He, shut the office down, opened it in the morning, and he didn't work weekends. He also never, like, his wife would say, "Hey, would you put the laundry in?" He'd be like, "No."
Mhm.
You know, not because he didn't want
Boundary
to help.
both ways, on both
Yeah.
ends. Yes.
And he said, "Not because I didn't want to help." He goes, "I will do the laundry after hours, but if I was in the office, she wouldn't ask me." Right? So I just thought I was going to experiment with that because it's very easy. And I used to own a big house, like a 2,500, 3,000 square foot house, and just my husband and I. And he would go to work every day. He Now he works from home, but I would be in my office, and there's a whole house that there's always something to do, dishes or laundry or dusting or whatever else. And sometimes you'd rather clean the bathrooms than make cold calls. Right? So I just had that as a rule, and I stuck to it. And I don't know why I was able to do that, but I always have. And now we live in a beautiful, apartment, and there's a lot less to do. Do I at lunchtime sometimes start a load of laundry? Yeah, because things are a lot different. But I still don't work at night. I still take every weekend off. When I go on vacation, I don't work. And I have set up systems to do that. And I help my clients do that too. I had a woman who had two young children who, not no exaggeration, was working anywhere from 60 to 80 hours. She was an executive, 60 to 80 hours a week. When I started working with her, I said, "How many do you want to work?" And she's like, "Well, if I could get to 55, I would be happy." I was like, "All right, I'm going to have a secret goal of getting you to 40." And she's like, "All right, but that's never going to happen." Ask me how much she works now. 40
Much.
hours a week. 40
Wow.
hours a week.
Is she
And
accomplishing as much? Does she feel she's as
yes,
productive? Is her employer as happy
more,
with her?
more. Yes, she's been promoted twice and gotten several performance raises, because the more time you give yourself to do something, the more time it takes.
Mhm.
So when you get clear about systems and how to create systems that are especially for the things that are repetitive, um, and you create those, th- then you don't have to fit them in, figure out, you know, think about them, you know. And she works in a business where there's a business, it's an organization, it's a nonprofit where there's a lot of um, emergencies. But she's now trained the next level of her who report to
Mhm.
her in what I've trained her in and in her expertise, so she doesn't get all the calls all the time. It's better that they're handling it because they're closer to the situation. They were relying on her to make all these decisions. She wasn't interfacing with these folks, right? So the right people are making the right this best decisions. So yeah, she's more productive. She's happier. She's able to participate in her kid's school. She's able to participate, have date night with her husband, like things like that. That's one example. I have many more. But she
Talk
was
about
just one.
transformation. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
she
that.
was one of the extremes because she could not see how she could possibly reduce her hours. And we started with 1 hour, 1 hour a week, honestly. And then we worked our way. Once she saw that, then we got to like, all right, we're going to have one day where you go home at 5 o'clock. There's no way I could do that. I said, all right, well, let's just calm down. And now she rarely works past 5. So it's anything's possible when you're in a state of mind where we have our most creative ability, and that is when we're at peace. Most people think your circumstances have to be correct in order to be at peace, and that is inaccurate. That is not true. Peace comes from within. It's never ever outside circumstances, never. It's always an inside job. And so I help people to access that. And when you know how to access that, then your creativity, your ability to solve problems that look unsolvable is just so much better. And so you're not overthinking, you're not like struggling and fighting with yourself all the time. So,
Wow. So a lot of light bulb moments that you help your clients see that you've experienced in your own life. And I wonder of all those different light bulb moments and you think about what you know now, if you could go back and you knew that to some former time, is there something in your past that you would do differently when you didn't know something that you had a light bulb moment later on in life?
I don't think so because I see everything as a learning curve now, and there's a lot of freedom that comes from that. Right? So I used to think, when I was studying psychology and all that self-help stuff, it was all about what was wrong with me and how could I fix it. And what I saw over the years, and the gift I like to give others is every human is 100% well underneath their thinking. So, but for our thinking, we are all mentally well. But our thinking is so pervasive and so compelling that we get convinced that we're not well, that something's wrong with us. And I didn't know that until I was in my 30s. And, you know, I'm not even sure I fully knew it then. But it is one of the things that I think if every human being could access their wellness, the world would change. And I've seen it time and time and time again. I mean, it's just why I keep doing what I do, is because wellness is our birthright. So if most of your audiences most of your audiences moms are moms, right? So
Yes.
every mom has held a baby, or every human has held a baby usually at some point. And we look at that infant and we see pure love, pure potential. There's a being there, but there's no thinking yet. There is a light and an energy within that baby. I don't know if it's within, but in the presence of that baby. Where do we think that goes? We're all born with this. Every one of us was born and still has that within us. And when you see that you're fine, your thinking might be messed up, but that's not even your fault. That's like being responsible for a thunderstorm passing by. We have thought storms and they look true. And when we can slow ourselves down and we learn that wellness is beneath everything, just like no matter how stormy it is outside, the sky is clear above the storm, right? It's clear above the clouds. If you've ever flown, you're above the clouds. It could be raining and all everything else underneath, but it's beautiful there. Same, that's a great metaphor for who we are as human beings. We are born pure and we never aren't that. It's just there's thinking that gets layered on. One of my two of my favorite people, or well, I should say favorite trainers, they're young men who teach same thing as I teach in Chicago public schools. Actually, it's called One Solution, and there's an organization called Rebels for Peace, and they teach this to kids. And they take a lamp with a lampshade, and it's bright, and they take these scarves and they put it over them, and it's like, I got mad at my sister and so I hate her. And they, do all these examples. Now I think I'm stupid and da da da. And suddenly it gets dark and dark, but the light is still bright. It just, you can't see it through all the scarves. And the kids have these aha moments because they realize that if they didn't believe their thinking, they would have that bright light. And that's true for all of us. And that's what I really work to help my clients discover for themselves is that their bright light has never been dimmed. It just looks that way when you have it covered up. And it's nobody's fault. I mean, from a young age, we're taught to, solve our thinking and solve our feelings. And we think we're responsible for them. We're just not. We're
Wow,
just not.
very beautiful.
Yeah.
An optimistic approach and something that anyone can understand when you explain it through the analogies and then be able to tap into either on their own or with the help of a coach. I really appreciate you sharing all of that with us today, Lisa.
Yeah. You're welcome. I just want to say one other thing, if it's okay. I um, decided that my contribution to, I don't know, trying to create more peace and less divisiveness and all of those things was to offer an opportunity for people to just drop into a conversation about this. So once a month, I am hosting, leading, I should say, a conversation about this. And so it's called Life is Different Starting Now. And it's about this paradigm and just the basics understanding so people can have access to it. No charge, no obligation. It's completely just an opportunity for people to hear more about what I'm talking about. Because I truly believe, and this may sound arrogant, I truly believe if people understood what I teach, there'd be such a different world. And I want to do more of that. So, one-on-one is great. Working in environments of, organizations is great. Now I'm going to offer it to the public just because.
Thank you for giving that to the community as your gesture it, in recognition of what we talked about earlier about kind of the chaos in the world. And you feel like you have one way that people can adopt a paradigm to not only deal with it, but to rise above it and find a better place for themselves. And we thank you for sharing that. And we'll be sure and give people links to that in the description. And we thank you for joining us today. And if you were inspired by Lisa's story, remember to share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe to meet our next amazing guest. If you want to invest in a solution to the childcare crisis, check out MomSub's equity crowdfunding campaign at momsub.com/invest or connect with MomSub on any of our social media pages. That's MomSub, like a substitute mom. Now, remember that your career, your choices, and your success are yours to define. So keep pushing boundaries and spreading your love and encouragement to other women who need it.